30 years ago, on a humid summer evening in July 1975, the Blackwood family, Robert, 42, his wife Margaret, 38, and their 3 children, Sarah, 16, Michael, 14, and little Emma, 8, vanished without a trace from their isolated farm in rural Georgia. The farmhouse stood empty the next morning, dinner plates still on the table, doors unlocked, and no signs of struggle. What should have been an ordinary family evening became one of the most haunting, unsolved disappearances in the county's history. Before we continue, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell. This helps us bring you more stories like this one. The disappearance plunged the tight-knit farming community into shock and confusion. Margaret's sister, Linda Patterson, discovered the empty house when the family failed to show up for Sunday church services. It was like they just evaporated, she would later tell investigators, her voice breaking with emotion. The milk was still fresh in the refrigerator, Robert's work boots sat by the door, and Sarah's diary lay open on her bed, the last entry dated July 12, 1975. Papa says we might get that new tractor next month. Mama made her famous peach pie tonight. The Blackwood family had lived on the 200-acre property for 8 years. Robert worked the tobacco fields, while Margaret homeschooled their children and tended to their vegetable garden. Neighbors described them as devoutly religious, hard-working, and intensely private. They rarely ventured into town except for church on Sundays and monthly supply runs. This isolation, which once provided them sanctuary, now made their disappearance even more mysterious. The local sheriff's department launched an immediate investigation, but the case quickly grew cold. Deputies found no evidence of foul play, no ransom demands, and no financial troubles that might explain a voluntary disappearance. Robert's pickup truck remained in the barn, and the family's modest savings account was never touched. The police considered various possibilities, from a family decision to start over elsewhere to the unthinkable possibility of violence. But without leads, witnesses, or bodies, the investigation stalled. The case devastated Margaret's elderly parents, who never stopped believing their daughter would walk through their door again. Linda Patterson spent her life savings hiring private investigators and placing missing person ads in newspapers across 3 states. They didn't just disappear, she insisted year after year. Someone knows what happened to my sister and those babies. Her unwavering faith that the truth would eventually surface sustained her through 3 decades of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers. As years turned into decades, the Blackwood farm became a local legend, standing abandoned and slowly succumbing to nature's reclaim. The case file gathered dust in the sheriff's department, joining countless other cold cases that time seemed determined to forget. But Linda Patterson refused to let the memory of her family fade into whispers and folklore, fighting tirelessly to keep their names alive and their story told. The morning after the discovery, Sheriff Tom Hendricks arrived at the Blackwood farm with a team of deputies, unprepared for what would become the most perplexing case of his career. The scene was eerily preserved, as if the family had simply vanished mid-activity. Margaret's sewing basket sat open beside her favorite chair, a half-finished quilt stretched across her lap. Michael's baseball glove lay on the porch steps, where he'd apparently dropped it, and Emma's collection of painted rocks was neatly arranged on the kitchen windowsill. The initial search revealed no signs of struggle or forced entry. All doors and windows remained unlocked, which wasn't unusual for the isolated farming community where neighbors trusted each other implicitly. Robert's hunting rifle hung undisturbed in its rack, and Margaret's jewelry box remained intact on their bedroom dresser. If someone had taken the family against their will, they had done so without leaving a single clue behind. Detective Ray Morrison, brought in from the state police, conducted extensive interviews with neighbors and church members. The last confirmed sighting placed the entire family at the Harmony Baptist Church on the morning of July 12th, where they had attended Sunday services as usual. Pastor William Hayes remembered speaking with Robert about the upcoming harvest, while Margaret had volunteered to coordinate the church's annual summer picnic. They seemed perfectly normal, the pastor recalled. Robert was optimistic about the tobacco crop, and Margaret was excited about little Emma starting piano lessons in the fall. The investigation expanded to include searches of the surrounding woods and farmland. Volunteers from the community joined law enforcement in combing through tobacco fields, checking old wells, and exploring abandoned structures scattered throughout the county. Bloodhounds were brought in, but found no scent trails leading away from the house. The dogs circled the property repeatedly, seeming confused by the lack of any departing trail. Financial records revealed nothing suspicious. The Blackwoods lived modestly but comfortably, with no outstanding debts or unusual transactions. Robert's brother in Alabama confirmed that the family had no reason to flee or start over elsewhere. Robert loved that land, he told investigators. He'd been planning to expand the tobacco operation and maybe add some cattle. He wouldn't have walked away from his dreams without saying goodbye. As weeks passed without leads, theories began circulating through the community. Some suggested the family had been victims of transient criminals. Others whispered about government conspiracies or family secrets. The lack of evidence frustrated investigators and fed wild speculation that would persist for decades. Margaret's parents, James and Ruth Coleman, established a reward fund that eventually grew to $50,000 for information leading to their family's whereabouts. They spent their remaining years driving to neighboring states, following up on reported sightings that inevitably led nowhere. Ruth Coleman died in 1989, taking her desperate hope to the grave. James followed 2 years later, never knowing what happened to his daughter and grandchildren. The official investigation remained active for 5 years before being reclassified as a cold case. Detective Morrison, who had become personally invested in finding answers, continued working leads on his own time until his retirement in 1992. He often said the Blackwood case haunted him more than any other in his 30-year career, calling it the perfect disappearance that made no sense. By 1980, the Blackwood case had faded from newspaper headlines, but it never left the hearts of those who loved them. Linda Patterson maintained a vigil that became legendary in their small Georgia community. Every Sunday, she placed fresh flowers on the empty plot she'd purchased in Harmony Cemetery, marking the space where she hoped to someday lay her sister and the children to rest. The headstone she erected read simply, "The Blackwood Family, Gone but Never Forgotten, 1975. The abandoned farmhouse became a source of local folklore as years passed. Teenagers dared each other to spend nights on the property, claiming to hear children's laughter echoing from empty rooms or see lights flickering in windows where no electricity flowed. The county eventually condemned the structure in 1985, but Linda fought the demolition order in court, arguing that destroying the house would eliminate any remaining evidence of her family's fate. Linda's obsession with finding answers consumed her life. She divorced her husband in 1982 when he begged her to move on, unable to understand her refusal to accept the family's probable death. She worked double shifts at the county hospital to fund her private investigations, spending weekends distributing missing person flyers in truck stops and bus stations across the southeast. Her home became a shrine to the missing family, with walls covered in newspaper clippings, police reports and photographs of Robert, Margaret, and the children. Private investigator Jack Thornton, whom Linda hired in 1987, spent 3 years re-examining the case. He interviewed dozens of people, including drifters who had passed through the area in 1975, but uncovered nothing new. "I've worked missing person cases for 20 years, Thornton told Linda, when he finally returned her remaining retainer fee. "Sometimes people just vanish, and we never get the answers we need. Your family's case is the most frustrating I've ever encountered." The sheriff's department experienced multiple personnel changes over the decades, and each new sheriff inherited the cold case files with varying degrees of interest. Some made token efforts to review the evidence, while others considered it a waste of resources to pursue leads that had been exhausted years earlier. The original case files were transferred to storage in 1995, joining hundreds of other unsolved mysteries, gathering dust in the county's archives. Margaret's childhood friend, Susan Wright, organized annual prayer vigils on the anniversary of the disappearance, but attendance dwindled as memories faded and younger residents had no connection to the tragedy. By the late 1990s, only Linda and a handful of elderly church members still gathered to remember the Blackwood family and pray for answers that seemed increasingly unlikely to come. Local real estate agents avoided showing the Blackwood property to potential buyers, not just because of its deteriorating condition, but due to its reputation. The few investors who expressed interest inevitably withdrew their offers after learning the property's history. The farm remained frozen in time, slowly surrendering to kudzu vines and weather, while the mystery of its former residents deepened with each passing season. Linda Patterson aged from a vibrant young woman into a gray-haired grandmother, but her determination never wavered. She kept a detailed journal, documenting every lead she pursued, every theory she investigated, and every dead end she encountered. "Someone out there knows what happened," she wrote in 1999. "I won't give up until I find them, even if it takes the rest of my life." In March 2003, Sheriff Janet Crawford took office, becoming the county's first female sheriff and bringing with her a reputation for solving cold cases through modern forensic techniques. A former state investigator with a master's degree in criminal justice, Crawford had campaigned partially on a promise to review unsolved cases using new technology and fresh perspectives. The Blackwood disappearance topped her list of priorities. Crawford's first act was to digitize all cold case files, including the extensive documentation from the Blackwood investigation. She was struck by the thoroughness of the original investigators and the complete absence of viable leads. "I've never seen a case where a family of 5 vanished so completely," she noted in her case review. "It defied all logical explanations, which made me think we might have missed something fundamental." When Crawford reached out to Linda Patterson, now 63 and suffering from diabetes, she found a woman whose hope had been renewed by the sheriff's genuine interest in the case. Linda had continued her solitary vigil for 28 years, never missing a Sunday visit to the cemetery, and still distributing missing person flyers whenever she traveled outside the county. "Sheriff Crawford was the first law enforcement officer in decades who treated me like more than a grieving woman who couldn't accept reality," Linda recalled. The sheriff assembled a cold case team that included Detective Maria Santos, a specialist in forensic genealogy, and Dr. Robert Kim, an anthropologist from the State University, who volunteered his expertise in examining old evidence with modern techniques. They began by re-interviewing surviving witnesses and family members, many of whom had never been contacted since the initial investigation. Their most significant discovery came from Robert Blackwood's elderly brother in Alabama, who revealed information he'd never shared with original investigators. "Robert called me the week before they disappeared," he told Crawford's team. "He was worried about someone who'd been asking questions about the family around town. Said it was probably nothing, but it made him uneasy. He was thinking about installing better locks on the house." This revelation prompted Crawford to examine the original witness statements more carefully. Several residents mentioned seeing an unfamiliar pickup truck in the area during the weeks leading up to the disappearance, but these reports had been dismissed as likely related to seasonal farm workers. The team began tracking down former migrant workers and temporary laborers who had been in the county during summer 1975, a massive undertaking that required cooperation from multiple agencies. Dr. Kim's examination of the farmhouse, now severely deteriorated but still standing, yielded intriguing results. Using ground-penetrating radar, his team detected several anomalies in the soil around the property, including what appeared to be disturbed earth beneath the collapsed barn and unusual density patterns near the old root cellar. These findings weren't conclusive evidence of anything sinister, but they suggested areas that warranted further investigation. The cold case team also employed new techniques to analyze trace evidence collected in 1975, but never fully processed due to technological limitations of the era. Hair fibers found in the house were subjected to DNA analysis, revealing genetic material from unknown individuals who had been present in the home. While the degraded samples couldn't provide definitive identification, they proved that people other than the Blackwood family had been in the house around the time of their disappearance. Crawford's investigation attracted media attention that the case hadn't received in decades. Local television stations ran feature stories about the renewed investigation, and Linda Patterson found herself once again fielding calls from reporters and amateur investigators. The publicity generated new tips, though most proved to be false leads or misremembered details from people trying to be helpful. The breakthrough came on a sweltering August morning in 2005, 30 years after the Blackwood family's disappearance. Dr. Kim's archaeological team had been systematically excavating the anomalies detected by ground-penetrating radar when graduate student Amy Chen made a discovery that would forever change the case. While carefully removing soil near the foundation of the original farmhouse, her trowel struck something metallic, a steel door handle buried beneath 3 feet of earth and debris. Further excavation revealed a concealed cellar entrance that had been deliberately covered and camouflaged. Unlike the known root cellar on the opposite side of the property, this underground chamber appeared to have been sealed with concrete and buried beneath layers of soil and rubble. The construction was sophisticated, suggesting someone with engineering knowledge had created this hidden space beneath the Blackwood home without the family's knowledge. Sheriff Crawford immediately secured the scene and called for specialized equipment to safely breach the sealed chamber. The concrete seal showed clear signs of having been poured hastily, with uneven surfaces and air bubbles indicating it had been mixed and applied by someone working quickly. Tool marks on the steel door suggested it had been welded shut from the outside before being buried. As news of the discovery spread, Linda Patterson arrived at the farm with a mixture of hope and dread that had sustained her for 3 decades. "I always knew something was under that house," she told reporters gathered at the police perimeter. "Margaret used to write about hearing strange sounds at night, like someone walking around below their bedroom. We thought it was just the old house settling." The excavation required 2 days of careful work to fully expose the cellar entrance without compromising potential evidence inside. When the sealed door was finally opened, investigators found a chamber approximately 12 feet square, constructed with professional-grade materials, including reinforced concrete walls and a ventilation system that had been deliberately disabled. The space contained furniture, personal belongings, and other items that would require extensive forensic analysis to fully catalogue. Dr. Kim's initial assessment revealed that the hidden cellar had been constructed sometime in the late 1960s or early 1970s, several years before the Blackwood family's disappearance. Whoever built it had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal its existence, including running electrical wiring that tapped into the house's main power supply and installing drainage systems to prevent flooding. The level of planning and execution suggested this was not a spontaneous crime, but part of a long-term strategy. The discovery attracted national media attention, with news crews arriving from Atlanta and beyond to cover the story. The Blackwood case, forgotten by most of the country, suddenly became front-page news as investigators worked to process evidence that might finally explain what happened to the missing family. Linda Patterson, now 65 and in fragile health, became the face of a story that had consumed half her life. If this case has already captivated you, leave a like. It helps the channel bring more stories like this one and helps the Blackwood family's story reach more people. Sheriff Crawford assembled a team of forensic specialists from across the region to process the cellar's contents. Every item would be carefully documented, photographed, and analyzed for DNA evidence, fingerprints, and other clues that might identify who constructed the chamber and what role it played in the family's disappearance. The investigation that had been cold for 30 years suddenly became the most active case in the county. The forensic analysis of the hidden cellar revealed disturbing evidence of its true purpose. The chamber had been designed as a long-term holding facility, complete with restraints, basic sanitation, and minimal furnishings that painted a horrifying picture of captivity. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the state's leading forensic anthropologist, determined that multiple people had been held in the space over an extended period based on DNA evidence and personal items found scattered throughout the chamber. Among the most significant discoveries were children's belongings that matched descriptions of items owned by the Blackwood children. Emma's favorite doll, identified by Linda Patterson from photographs, was found in a corner of the cellar along with a child's shoe that matched the size Sarah would have worn. These items had been preserved in the sealed environment, maintaining DNA evidence that confirmed their connection to the missing family. The cellar's construction revealed the methodical planning of someone with extensive knowledge of the Blackwood property. The entrance had been built beneath a section of the house that the family rarely used, accessed through what appeared to be a natural depression in the ground behind the farmhouse. Whoever created this prison had studied the family's routines and chosen a location that would remain undetected even by the inhabitants of the house above. Detective Santos's analysis of the electrical and ventilation systems provided crucial timeline evidence. The power tap into the house's main electrical system had been installed in 1973, 2 years before the disappearance, indicating that someone had been planning this crime for an extended period. The ventilation system included filters and fans that would have allowed people to survive in the chamber for weeks or months, suggesting the perpetrator intended to keep victims alive rather than simply disposing of them immediately. DNA analysis revealed genetic material from at least 6 different individuals in the cellar, including all 5 members of the Blackwood family. The additional DNA sample belonged to an unknown male whose genetic profile was immediately entered into national databases. While no immediate match was found, the profile would eventually become crucial in identifying the perpetrator. Personal items found in the cellar painted a picture of prolonged captivity and psychological torture. Margaret's wedding ring was discovered along with pages torn from her Bible, on which someone had written desperate prayers and pleas for rescue. Robert's wallet contained family photographs that appeared to have been deliberately damaged, suggesting the psychological torment inflicted on the family during their captivity. The most disturbing discovery was a crude calendar scratched into the concrete wall, apparently marking the passage of days during the family's imprisonment. The tally marks extended for approximately 6 weeks, indicating that the Blackwoods had survived in the underground chamber for more than a month after their initial disappearance. This revelation devastated Linda Patterson, who realized her sister and the children had suffered far longer than anyone had imagined. Sheriff Crawford's team also found evidence that the perpetrator had visited the cellar regularly during the family's captivity. Food containers, medical supplies, and other maintenance items suggested someone had been sustaining the prisoners while keeping them hidden from the extensive search efforts taking place above ground. The level of organization and preparation indicated this was not a crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated abduction with a specific, sinister purpose. The investigation expanded to examine who had access to the Blackwood property during the relevant time period. Construction records from the early 1970s revealed that several contractors had worked on various projects in the area, including utility installations and agricultural improvements. The team began the painstaking process of tracking down workers who had been employed on properties near the Blackwood farm, looking for someone with both the skills and opportunity to construct the hidden chamber. The breakthrough in identifying the perpetrator came from an unexpected source: a routine DNA test conducted on a man arrested for burglary in a neighboring county. Thomas Sullivan, 67, a former construction worker and handyman, provided a DNA sample that matched the unknown profile found in the Blackwood cellar. When confronted with this evidence, Sullivan initially denied any knowledge of the family or their disappearance, but his story quickly unraveled under careful questioning. Sheriff Crawford's investigation revealed that Sullivan had worked for various contractors throughout rural Georgia during the 1970s, often taking on projects that gave him extended access to isolated properties. His work history showed he had been employed by a utility company that installed electrical service upgrades in the Blackwood area during 1972 and 1973, providing him with detailed knowledge of the family's property and routines. Sullivan's background revealed a pattern of disturbing behavior that had never been connected to serious crimes. He had been arrested multiple times for trespassing and voyeurism, but had served only short jail sentences. Former neighbors described him as a loner who seemed unusually interested in families with young children, often taking jobs that allowed him to observe their daily activities for extended periods. The interrogation of Sullivan revealed the full scope of his crimes against the Blackwood family. Over several sessions with experienced detectives, he gradually admitted to constructing the hidden cellar with the specific intention of abducting and imprisoning the family. His obsession with Margaret Blackwood had developed during his work on their property, evolving into an elaborate fantasy that drove him to spend months planning and executing their capture. Sullivan's confession provided horrific details about the family's captivity. He had abducted them on the night of July 12, 1975, using a combination of drugs and physical force to transport them to the underground chamber. His plan had been to keep them indefinitely, maintaining control over their lives while the outside world assumed they had simply vanished. The family's desperate attempts to escape or attract attention had been systematically thwarted by Sullivan's preparation and the chamber's isolation. The confession also revealed the fate of the Blackwood family members. According to Sullivan, all 5 had died in the chamber over the course of their 6-week captivity, succumbing to a combination of medical neglect, psychological trauma, and the harsh conditions of their imprisonment. Sullivan claimed he had disposed of their remains in a remote location, but refused to provide specific details about where they could be found. Linda Patterson, now 67 and suffering from advanced diabetes, listened to Sullivan's confession with a mixture of relief and devastation. After 30 years of uncertainty, she finally had answers about her sister's fate, but the reality was more horrific than anything she had imagined. At least now I know Margaret and the children didn't suffer, wondering if anyone was looking for them, she told reporters. They knew we never stopped trying to bring them home. The legal proceedings against Sullivan moved quickly, as his confession and the overwhelming physical evidence made his guilt undeniable. He pleaded guilty to 5 counts of kidnapping and murder in exchange for a life sentence, without the possibility of parole, avoiding the death penalty that prosecutors had initially sought. The plea agreement also required him to cooperate in locating the family's remains, though his memory of their disposal location proved frustratingly vague. Sheriff Crawford organized extensive searches based on Sullivan's limited recollections, but the remote areas of Georgia wilderness he described had changed dramatically over 3 decades. The remains of the Blackwood family have never been recovered, leaving Linda Patterson with answers about their fate but no physical closure. She continues to hope that someday hikers or developers will discover the graves that would allow her to finally lay her sister and the children to rest in Harmony Cemetery. The resolution of the Blackwood case brought national attention to the failures of the original investigation and the importance of never giving up on missing persons cases. Sheriff Crawford's methodical approach and use of modern forensic techniques demonstrated how cold cases could be solved decades after traditional investigative methods had been exhausted. The case became a model for law enforcement agencies dealing with similar long-term disappearances, studied in criminal justice programs across the country and referenced in FBI training materials. Thomas Sullivan's sentencing hearing in 2006 provided Linda Patterson with her only opportunity to confront the man who had destroyed her family. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, law enforcement officials, and supporters who had followed Linda's decades-long quest for answers. In a victim impact statement that moved the entire courtroom to tears, she spoke directly to Sullivan about the 31 years of anguish his crimes had caused. "You didn't just take my sister and those beautiful children," she told him, her voice steady despite her visible trembling. "You stole my entire adult life, filling it with questions that haunted me every single day. You took my marriage, my peace of mind, and my ability to trust that the world was a safe place." Sullivan sat motionless during her statement, showing no visible emotion or remorse. His defense attorney had advised him to remain silent, but witnesses later described seeing him occasionally glance at Linda with what appeared to be mild curiosity rather than guilt or shame. This lack of empathy reinforced the prosecution's psychological profile of Sullivan as a sociopathic predator who viewed his victims as objects rather than human beings with families who loved them. The hearing also revealed additional disturbing details about Sullivan's criminal history that had been uncovered during the investigation. Detective work spanning multiple states uncovered evidence linking him to several other unsolved disappearances throughout the Southeast during the 1970s and 1980s. In Alabama, a family of 4 had vanished from their remote cabin in 1978, leaving behind a scene remarkably similar to the Blackwood farm. In South Carolina, 2 teenage sisters had disappeared while walking home from school in 1982, their route passing through an area where Sullivan had been working on a bridge construction project. While Sullivan never confessed to additional crimes beyond the Blackwood murders, circumstantial evidence suggested the Georgia family may not have been his only victims. His employment records showed a disturbing pattern of taking jobs in rural areas where families subsequently vanished without explanation. These cases remain under investigation by a multi-agency task force led by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, which has identified Sullivan as a potential serial killer whose crimes may span multiple decades and states. The psychological evaluation conducted for Sullivan's sentencing revealed a man who had lived his entire adult life, planning and executing elaborate fantasies of control and domination. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a forensic psychiatrist who interviewed Sullivan extensively, described him as one of the most calculating predators she had encountered in 20 years of practice. "He didn't act on impulse," she testified. "Every aspect of his crimes was meticulously planned, from the selection of victims to the construction of imprisonment facilities. This level of premeditation suggests someone who derived pleasure not just from the act of abduction, but from the extended process of planning and anticipation." Linda Patterson used the media attention surrounding the case's resolution to advocate for comprehensive missing persons reforms. She testified before the Georgia legislature about the inadequacies of the original investigation and the need for systematic approaches to tracking disappeared individuals. Her advocacy led to the establishment of the Georgia Missing Persons Database in 2007, a comprehensive system that ensures cases like her family's would be systematically tracked and regularly reviewed using advancing forensic technology. The database implementation required Linda to relive her family's story countless times, speaking to legislators, law enforcement officials, and media representatives about the importance of never abandoning hope for missing persons. Despite her declining health, diabetes had begun affecting her vision and mobility. She traveled throughout the state, sharing her experience and pushing for institutional changes that would prevent other families from enduring the decades of uncertainty she had faced. The Blackwood property, site of so much tragedy and mystery, became the center of extensive legal proceedings as various parties debated its future. Linda Patterson fought against development proposals, arguing that the site should be preserved as both a memorial to disappeared persons and a training ground for law enforcement. Her campaign attracted support from victim advocacy groups, forensic professionals, and community members who recognized the site's unique educational value. The county eventually purchased the property in 2008 for $400,000, funded through a combination of state grants and private donations. Linda worked closely with local officials, landscape architects, and memorial designers to create a space that would honor the memory of disappeared persons while providing families with a place for reflection and healing. The memorial park design included a garden where visitors could leave flowers, a meditation pavilion overlooking the former farmhouse site, and a wall inscribed with the names of missing persons from throughout the region. The memorial's centerpiece became a bronze sculpture depicting 5 figures walking toward the light, representing the Blackwood family's journey from darkness to remembrance. Linda insisted that the sculpture include space for additional figures to be added, symbolizing other missing persons whose stories might be discovered through continued investigation and advocacy. The memorial was dedicated on July 12, 2009, exactly 34 years after the family's disappearance, with hundreds of attendees, including families of missing persons from across the Southeast. Dr. Kim's archaeological work at the site continued for several years after Sullivan's conviction, using the Blackwood Cellar as a training ground for students learning forensic excavation techniques. The hidden chamber was carefully preserved and converted into an educational facility, complete with climate control systems to protect the evidence and viewing areas for law enforcement training sessions. The site became an important resource for understanding how predators plan and execute long-term abductions, with investigators from across the country visiting to study Sullivan's methodical approach. The training program established at the site has educated hundreds of law enforcement officers, forensic specialists, and emergency responders in recognizing signs of concealed imprisonment and processing complex crime scenes. Students who train at the Blackwood site carry forward lessons learned from the case, spreading improved investigative techniques throughout law enforcement agencies across the region and beyond. Sullivan's incarceration in Georgia's maximum security prison system was marked by his continued refusal to provide information about the location of the Blackwood family's remains or details about any other potential victims. Prison officials described him as a model inmate who followed rules precisely, but showed no interest in rehabilitation programs or counseling services. He spent most of his time reading technical manuals and engineering texts, pursuits that guards found unsettling given the sophisticated nature of his crimes. Periodic attempts by investigators to extract additional information from Sullivan proved fruitless. He would sit silently through questioning sessions, occasionally smiling in ways that suggested he enjoyed withholding information that could provide closure to grieving families. This psychological torture of survivors became another aspect of his crimes, extending his control and manipulation beyond the original acts of violence. Today, nearly 5 decades after the Blackwood family vanished from their Georgia farm, their story continues to resonate with investigators, families of missing persons, and communities grappling with unsolved disappearances. The case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches missing persons investigations, emphasizing the importance of preserving crime scenes and evidence for future analysis using technologies that don't yet exist. Police academies across the country now teach the Blackwood method of crime scene preservation, which prioritizes long-term storage of physical evidence and detailed documentation of even seemingly insignificant details. Linda Patterson's final years were marked by a bittersweet combination of closure and continued grief. While she had finally learned the truth about her family's fate, the knowledge that they had suffered for weeks in Sullivan's underground prison haunted her remaining days. She developed a ritual of visiting the memorial park every morning at sunrise, sitting on the bench overlooking the former farmhouse site while drinking coffee from a thermos and speaking quietly to her sister and the children as if they were present. Despite her declining health, diabetes had progressed to require insulin injections and had begun affecting her kidneys. Linda maintained an exhausting schedule of speaking engagements and advocacy work. She testified before legislative committees in 7 states, pushing for missing persons reforms and improved cold case protocols. Her presentations, always accompanied by photographs of Margaret and the children, moved audiences to tears and frequently resulted in increased funding for missing persons investigations. The Georgia Missing Persons database that Linda helped establish evolved into a sophisticated system that tracks thousands of cases and has been instrumental in solving dozens of disappearances. The database employs artificial intelligence to identify patterns between cases, cross-reference DNA evidence, and alert investigators to potential connections that might otherwise go unnoticed. Advanced facial recognition technology helps identify age-progressed photos of missing persons, while genealogical DNA analysis has reunited families decades after disappearances occurred. The systematic approach to tracking and reviewing cases, combined with advancing DNA technology and forensic techniques, has provided closure to families who had given up hope of ever learning their loved one's fate. The database has solved cold cases dating back to the 1960s, including several that showed disturbing similarities to Sullivan's methods. Linda's advocacy work created lasting institutional changes that continue to benefit families facing similar tragedies, with the Georgia model being adopted by law enforcement agencies across the United States and internationally. Sheriff Crawford, who solved the Blackwood case and brought Thomas Sullivan to justice, used the case's success to transform her department's approach to cold case investigations. She established specialized units focused on long-term missing persons cases and secured federal grants to purchase advanced forensic equipment. Under her leadership, the county solved 15 additional cold cases, earning recognition from the National Sheriff's Association and establishing her as a leading expert in missing persons investigations. When Crawford retired in 2015, after serving 3 terms, she established a cold case consulting firm that helps smaller law enforcement agencies apply modern techniques to their unsolved investigations. Her company, Persistent Justice Consulting, has worked on cases in 37 states and has achieved a remarkable 60% success rate in providing new leads or closure to families. The Blackwood case remains her most significant professional achievement and continues to influence her approach to missing persons investigations, serving as both inspiration and cautionary tale for the complexity of human evil. The consulting firm's methods, developed from lessons learned in the Blackwood investigation, emphasize community engagement, family advocacy, and the integration of traditional detective work with cutting-edge forensic science. Crawford's team includes former FBI profilers, forensic anthropologists, genealogical researchers, and victim advocates who work together to approach cold cases from multiple angles simultaneously. Thomas Sullivan died in prison in 2019 at the age of 81, succumbing to complications from lung cancer after a brief illness. His death was discovered during a routine morning check, and prison officials noted that he had spent his final weeks reading engineering textbooks and sketching architectural diagrams, pursuits that continued to disturb staff who understood the connection to his crimes. He had shown no signs of remorse during his 13 years of incarceration and had never expressed interest in providing information that might help locate his victims' remains. Sullivan's death closed the final chapter on direct accountability for the crimes, but investigators continue searching for the burial sites he described in his vague confession. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation maintains an active file on Sullivan's potential connection to other unsolved disappearances, with agents regularly reviewing new forensic technologies that might extract additional information from evidence collected decades ago. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of areas Sullivan mentioned in his confession continue periodically, though the remote Georgia wilderness has changed dramatically over the intervening decades. The search for the Blackwood family's remains has become a secondary mission for many in the law enforcement community, with retired officers and volunteer search organizations dedicating personal time to exploring potential burial sites. Linda Patterson had established a $100,000 reward fund for information leading to the recovery of the remains, money that remains unclaimed but continues to generate tips and leads that investigators dutifully pursue. The memorial park established at the former Blackwood property has evolved into a pilgrimage site for families of missing persons and a premier training ground for law enforcement agencies studying the case. Annual vigils held on the anniversary of the family's disappearance attract hundreds of attendees, including families from across the country who find comfort in connecting with others who understand their unique form of grief. The preserved cellar serves as a stark reminder of human evil, while also demonstrating how careful investigation and advancing technology can eventually reveal even the most carefully hidden crimes. The memorial has expanded over the years to include additional elements requested by visiting families. A children's garden features playground equipment and colorful flowers, representing hope and the continuation of life despite tragedy. A reflection pond includes stones inscribed with the names of missing persons, with new stones added regularly, as families learn about the memorial through media coverage and word of mouth. The wall of names now includes over 3,000 missing persons from across the Southeast, making it one of the most comprehensive missing persons memorials in the United States. Dr. Kim's forensic archaeology program at the State University has become internationally recognized for its innovative approaches to historical crime scene analysis. The program attracts students from around the world who want to learn the techniques developed through the Blackwood investigation. The university has established exchange programs with international law enforcement agencies, sharing expertise in cold case investigation and advanced forensic techniques with investigators dealing with similar challenges in their own countries. The case has inspired legislative changes beyond Georgia's borders, with multiple states adopting similar missing persons databases and protocols for preserving cold case evidence. The Blackwood Protocol, as it's formally known in law enforcement circles, emphasizes maintaining detailed records and physical evidence, even in cases that appear unsolvable, recognizing that future technology may provide answers that current methods cannot achieve. This approach has revolutionized cold case investigation, with agencies now viewing unsolved cases as temporarily unanswered rather than permanently closed. Recent advances in DNA analysis and genealogical research have renewed hope for solving other cold cases connected to Sullivan's activities. Investigators continue examining evidence from unsolved disappearances throughout the Southeast, using familial DNA searches and genetic genealogy to identify potential victims and connect seemingly unrelated cases. Several investigations have shown promising leads, though none have yet resulted in definitive connections to Sullivan's other suspected crimes. The story of the Blackwood family serves as both a tragedy and a testament to the power of persistence in seeking justice. While Margaret, Robert, Sarah, Michael, and Emma were never recovered and properly laid to rest, their memory lives on through the reforms their case inspired and the families who have found closure through improved investigative techniques. Their disappearance, which once represented the failure of the justice system, ultimately became a catalyst for transforming how society responds to missing persons cases. Linda Patterson passed away peacefully in 2018 at the age of 78, having devoted 43 years of her life to seeking justice for her sister's family. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including law enforcement officers, victim advocates, families of missing persons from across the country, and government officials whose careers had been influenced by her advocacy work. She was buried in Harmony Cemetery, next to the memorial plot she had maintained for the Blackwood family for over 4 decades, finally reunited in death with the sister she had never stopped seeking in life. Linda's final journal entry, discovered after her death, captured the bittersweet nature of her life's work. "I never got to hold my sister again or watch those children grow up, but I made sure they weren't forgotten. Sometimes that has to be enough. I pray that other families won't have to wait as long as I did for answers, and that Margaret knows I never stopped looking for her, The pain never goes away, but knowing the truth has finally allowed me to rest. I hope I made a difference for other families still searching for their loved ones. The Linda Patterson Foundation, established with funds from her estate, continues her advocacy work by providing financial assistance to families of missing persons and supporting research into advanced investigative techniques. The foundation has funded dozens of cold case investigations and has helped families travel to attend trials, participate in searches, and access resources they couldn't otherwise afford. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of the Blackwood family. See you in the next video. 5 years have passed since Linda Patterson was laid to rest beside the empty graves she had tended for over 4 decades. The morning sun still rises over Harmony Cemetery, casting long shadows across the headstones that mark both the living's grief and the dead's silence. Visitors still come regularly to the Blackwood Memorial Plot, leaving fresh flowers and handwritten notes for a family that vanished into darkness but emerged into eternal remembrance. The memorial park at the former Blackwood property has become more than anyone anticipated when Linda first envisioned a place of healing. Last month, a family from Oregon traveled across the country to visit after their teenage son disappeared while hiking. They sat in the meditation pavilion for hours, finding solace in a community of grief they never knew existed. The guest book in the visitor center contains entries in dozens of languages, testimony to how deeply the story of 5 missing souls has resonated across cultures and continents. Sheriff Crawford's successor, Sheriff Michael Torres, continues the department's commitment to cold case investigations that began with the Blackwood breakthrough. His team recently solved a 1989 disappearance using techniques developed from Linda Patterson's advocacy work, bringing closure to another family that had waited decades for answers. The Georgia Missing Persons database now serves as a model for similar systems worldwide, with delegations from law enforcement agencies in Canada, Australia, and the European Union visiting to study its methodologies. Dr. Kim, now in his 70s, still brings forensic archaeology students to the preserved cellar twice each year. The underground chamber, once a place of unimaginable horror, has become a classroom where future investigators learn to recognize signs of concealed crimes and process complex evidence with scientific precision. His students often report being deeply affected by their training at the site, carrying forward not just technical skills, but a profound understanding of why their work matters to grieving families. The search for Thomas Sullivan's other victims continues through the persistent efforts of both law enforcement and civilian volunteers. The Thomas Sullivan Task Force, a multi-agency investigation spanning 6 states, has identified 17 unsolved disappearances that show potential connections to his methods and timeline. While no additional victims have been definitively confirmed, the investigation has reopened several cold cases and provided new leads in others that had been considered hopeless. Recent technological advances have brought renewed hope to these investigations. Environmental DNA analysis can now detect genetic material in soil samples decades old, potentially revealing burial sites that traditional methods cannot locate. Ground-penetrating radar technology has become sophisticated enough to detect disturbances in Earth that occurred 50 years ago, while satellite imagery analysis can identify changes in terrain over time that might indicate concealed graves. The Blackwood family's remains have never been found, despite extensive searches of the areas Sullivan described in his confession. Linda Patterson's reward fund, now administered by her foundation, continues to generate tips from hikers, hunters, and construction workers who discover suspicious sites in Georgia's vast wilderness. Each lead is investigated thoroughly, though none have yet led to the discovery that would finally allow the family to rest in Harmony Cemetery beside Linda's grave. Margaret's surviving relatives, distant cousins, and the children of old family friends maintain connections through the annual memorial vigil held each July 12th. These gatherings have evolved into celebrations of life rather than just remembrances of death, with attendees sharing stories of how the Blackwood case inspired them to advocacy, law enforcement careers, or simply a deeper appreciation for family bonds. The vigil always concludes with the reading of names from the memorial wall, ensuring that other missing persons are remembered alongside the family that brought the community together. The Blackwood case has been featured in over 30 documentaries, podcasts, and true crime series, reaching millions of viewers worldwide and generating thousands of tips for other missing persons cases. Several families have credited the publicity surrounding the case with bringing attention to their own missing loved ones, leading to breakthroughs that might never have occurred otherwise. The ripple effects of Linda Patterson's determination continue expanding decades after her death. Academic researchers studying the case have identified it as a pivotal moment in the evolution of victim advocacy and cold case investigation. The combination of persistent family pressure, advancing forensic technology, and dedicated law enforcement created a perfect storm that not only solved a decades-old mystery, but transformed investigative practices nationwide. Law schools now teach courses on victim advocacy, using Linda Patterson's campaign as a case study in effective grassroots organizing and institutional reform. The psychological profile developed of Thomas Sullivan has become a standard reference for identifying potential serial predators who use employment mobility to access victims. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has incorporated Sullivan's methods into their training materials, helping agents recognize patterns that might indicate similar offenders operating in their jurisdictions. His case demonstrates how predators can hide in plain sight for decades, while methodically planning and executing elaborate crimes. The hidden cellar beneath the Blackwood house stands as a testament to both human evil and the power of truth to emerge from even the darkest concealment. Visitors often ask guides how such a sophisticated construction project could have been completed without detection, leading to discussions about community awareness and the importance of paying attention to unusual activities in isolated areas. The preserved crime scene serves as both historical artifact and contemporary warning about the dangers that can lurk beneath ordinary appearances. On quiet evenings at the Memorial Park, when the last visitors have departed, and the Georgia countryside settles into twilight, there's a profound sense of peace that transcends the tragedy that occurred there. The garden Linda Patterson designed has matured into a sanctuary where wildflowers bloom around benches placed for contemplation, and the sound of wind through pine trees carries whispers of remembrance for all who have been lost. The bronze sculpture of 5 figures walking toward the light has developed a patina that gives it an ethereal quality in certain lighting, and visitors often comment on how the figures seem to be moving, progressing on their eternal journey from darkness into memory. Children who visit with their parents sometimes ask if the sculpture figures will reach the light they're walking toward, a question that guides answer by explaining how some journeys continue long after they begin. The story of the Blackwood family, Margaret, Robert, Sarah, Michael, and little Emma, has become larger than the sum of their individual lives or even their tragic deaths. They represent every missing person whose absence creates an unbearable void in the hearts of those who love them, and every family that refuses to surrender hope despite the passage of years and the silence of official investigations. Their legacy lives not in the horror of their final weeks, but in the love that searched for them across 3 decades and the reforms that search inspired. In the end, perhaps Linda Patterson achieved something more valuable than recovering her sister's remains or seeing their killer face earthly justice. She ensured that 5 people who disappeared without trace became impossible to forget, their names spoken in legislative chambers and classroom discussions, their story inspiring others to never abandon hope for their own missing loved ones. The darkness that consumed them has been transformed into light that continues guiding others home. The Blackwood mystery began with a question, where did they go, that seemed destined to remain forever unanswered. It concludes not with all mysteries solved, but with the understanding that some questions matter less than the love that keeps asking them, and that sometimes the search itself becomes more important than what we ultimately find. In learning what happened to one missing family, we learned how to better search for all the others still waiting to be found. Their story continues in every missing person database entry, every cold case reopened with new technology, every family that refuses to accept silence as an answer. The Blackwoods are still walking toward the light, and in following their path, others have found their way home.